What if everything you knew about yourself, your life, and your past was suddenly proven wrong? Imagine a single moment that shatters the foundation of your identity, forcing you to question reality itself. This is the gripping story of a successful woman in New York, whose perfectly ordered world is thrown into chaos by an event that defies explanation, leading her down a path of buried secrets and heartbreaking truths. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible true-life drama, if you're new here and love stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. The late afternoon in New York City was a symphony of car horns, the cold drizzle over 6th Avenue painting the asphalt a metallic gray. Amidst the rushing tide of people hurrying home or seeking shelter, a tall woman suddenly stumbled. Her eyes rolled back, and the shopping bag she held slipped from her fingers, scattering a few meager items onto the wet pavement. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as she collapsed, motionless, into the city's relentless flow. Bystanders rushed to help, and soon a yellow cab was flagged down, rushing her to the nearest hospital, the Metropolitan General Hospital, a towering structure of glass and steel that dominated the Midtown skyline, renowned for its excellence and home to the esteemed Dr. Sarah Jenkins. As they wheeled her into the bustling emergency room, the on-duty staff froze. Urgent whispers cut through the usual hum. "It's Dr. Jenkins!" a nurse gasped, her voice filled with disbelief. "My God, what happened to the director?" Dr. Sarah Jenkins was a prominent and respected figure at Metropolitan General. The woman on the stretcher was, to everyone there, unmistakably her. The same height, the same platinum blonde bob haircut, the same striking features. In an emergency involving the director herself, the usual rigorous identification protocols were bypassed by urgency and deep concern. There was no doubt in anyone's mind. This was Sarah Jenkins, the unconscious doctor. Jenkins was rushed to the trauma bay with maximum priority. As the emergency team worked to stabilize her, Chief of Neurology, Dr. Mark Thompson, was called in urgently. The gravity of the situation and the patient's apparent identity demanded the attention of the highest ranks. Preliminary exams and scans were performed quickly. The patient's cell phone, found in her bag, was locked, and she had no other identification on her. But this was seen only as a strange minor detail in the rush of the moment. The priority was diagnosing and treating the director. The diagnosis came as a shock to Dr. Thompson and his team. A rare and aggressive autoimmune disease requiring complex and immediate treatment. Word spread through the hospital in worried whispers. The director was seriously ill. A private suite on the 3rd floor, usually reserved for VIP patients or cases of the highest importance, was prepared for her under the name Sarah Jenkins. It was crucial to inform the director's family about her grave condition. Thompson managed to get hold of the phone number for Eleanor Jenkins, Sarah's mother, from old hospital emergency records. The call was made late at night. Eleanor answered with a sleepy voice, but soon sleep gave way to panic as Thompson explained the situation. Her daughter, Sarah, found unconscious, hospitalized with a rare disease at her own hospital. Eleanor's initial disbelief, but Sarah was fine today, was quickly overcome by the seriousness of Thompson's tone. He reassured her about the care being provided, but didn't downplay the severity of the diagnosis. "I'm catching the first flight to New York," Eleanor said, her voice thick with worry and shock. "I'll be there as soon as I can." The entire team at Metropolitan General was fully engaged. The person fighting for her life in room 302 was their director. The night passed under a veil of seriousness and apprehension, with the whole hospital focused on their leader's recovery, oblivious to the spectacular truth the next morning would bring and the even greater shock awaiting Eleanor Jenkins upon her arrival. The next morning arrived, bringing with it an overcast sky over New York. Dr. Sarah Jenkins entered the lobby of Metropolitan General with her usual determined stride and undeniable aura of authority. She wore an impeccable suit and carried her designer handbag, ready for a productive day that, she hoped, would be less stressful than the previous week. But as soon as she walked through the revolving doors, she sensed something was terribly wrong. The usual hospital buzz was replaced by a tense silence. Heads turned, eyes widened in pure disbelief. Stifled murmurs crackled like electric sparks in the air. The receptionist, a usually composed young woman named Lisa, dropped the pen she was holding, her eyes fixed on Sarah with an expression of someone seeing a ghost. Dr. Jenkins?" Lisa stammered, her voice trembling. But you're here?" Sarah paused, confused. What on earth was happening? The tension in the air was thick, almost palpable. Several staff members, some who would normally greet her warmly, were now staring at her with a mixture of fear and perplexity. "Yes, Lisa, I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice calm, though a prickle of apprehension was beginning to gnaw at her. "Why the surprise? Is something wrong?" It was then that Dr. Mark Thompson appeared down the corridor, coming from the direction of the inpatient units. His expression was one of genuine shock, as if he'd seen something that defied all medical and scientific logic. "Sarah, how is this possible?" he exclaimed, approaching quickly. You weren't supposed to be." He stopped, visibly shaken, unable to articulate the full sentence. Sarah felt her heart leap. "Not supposed to be where, Mark? What's going on? Everyone's acting strangely." Dr. Thompson took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, though his eyes were still wide. "Sarah, there's a patient. She was brought in last night, found unconscious on the street. And we thought it was you. She is you, Sarah." He pointed, his hand trembling slightly, towards the third floor. "She's admitted in room 302, with your chart, under your name." Sarah's confusion turned into a chilling coldness that crept up her spine. A patient identical to her? So alike that the entire staff and even her own mother were fooled? The logical, skeptical mind of the hospital director struggled to process the absurd information. It made no sense. It was impossible. "Take me to her, Mark," Sarah said, her voice now low, but with an intensity that allowed no refusal. "Now!" The fear gave way to an urgent, terrifying need to see this woman with her own eyes. Accompanied by a still perplexed Dr. Thompson, and under the incredulous gaze of dozens of staff members who watched her pass, Sarah walked down the main corridor, the tense silence weighing heavily on her. They took the elevator to the third floor, each second feeling like an eternity. The corridor of the private wing was quiet, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. They stopped in front of the door to room 302. The sign on the door read, "Sarah Jenkins." Sarah hesitated for a moment, Thompson's hand hovering over the doorknob. The tension in the air was unbearable. What would she find in there? Something that would challenge her very identity. Thompson opened the door slowly. The soft light of the room illuminated the patient lying in bed. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, tubes and monitors connected to her, but the face. It was her face. It was like looking at herself in a mirror, but with an expression of vulnerability and fragility that Sarah had never seen on her own reflection. The same blonde haircut, though a bit disheveled, the same features. It was her. And yet, it wasn't. The shock was absolute, paralyzing. Sarah took a step back, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes fixed on the woman in the bed. It was impossible, completely impossible. But there she was, a perfect duplicate, lying in her hospital room under her name. The mystery, the whispers, the shocked stares, it all made terrifying sense. Sarah Jenkins's life, so controlled and predictable, had just been turned upside down by a face identical to her own. The silence in the room was broken only by the sounds of the monitors, each beep confirming the real and undeniable presence of her doppelganger. The puzzle was only just beginning to form, and the pieces were more disturbing than she could ever have imagined. Whoa, what a reveal. Can you imagine walking into that? The mystery is just getting deeper. Don't miss how Sarah unravels this incredible secret and what it means for her life. If you're hooked, make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when the next parts drop. The silence in room 302 stretched on, filled only by the rhythmic sound of the medical equipment and the shallow breathing of the woman in the bed. Sarah Jenkins felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. That woman, it was her, but it wasn't. It was a visual paradox that her logical mind refused to accept, but her eyes couldn't deny. Mark Thompson stood beside her, equally stunned, his own disbelief mirrored in his face. I don't understand," Sarah stammered, finally finding her voice, though it sounded strange, muffled. Who is she, Mark? This isn't possible." Thompson shook his head, just as lost as she was. "We don't know, Sarah. She was brought in without identification. Just the cell phone, which was locked. The resemblance? It's uncanny. Everyone here, we really thought it was you." The gravity of the patient's situation, the rare disease that afflicted her, suddenly took on a new dimension, separate from the director's identity. But the most pressing question now wasn't the patient's health, but who she was and why she looked like a perfect copy of Sarah Jenkins. Sarah's mind, despite the shock, began to shift into problem-solving mode. There was only one way to unravel this biological mystery. "We need a DNA test, Mark," she said, her voice gaining firmness, the director reclaiming control over the frightened individual. "Immediately. A sample from her, and one from me. We have to know if there's any relation. Any connection." Thompson readily agreed. The confusion and apprehension throughout the hospital were palpable. A reputable lab was contacted urgently, maximum priority assigned to the case. Samples were taken from the still unconscious patient and from a slightly trembling Sarah. The hours that followed were silent torture. Sarah remained at the hospital, unable to go home, unable to do anything but wait. Her mind raced with possibilities. A doppelganger? A bizarre genetic coincidence? Twins? The last hypothesis seemed the most improbable and the most disturbing. Late that afternoon, the results arrived. Dr. Thompson handed the envelope to Sarah, his face tense. She opened it with hesitant fingers. She read the report, read it again. Her eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness. It was a mixture of shock, anger, and overwhelming confusion. The report was unequivocal. The probability of relatedness between Sarah Jenkins and the unknown patient was 99.99%. They shared the same fundamental genetic code. They were sisters, twins. Sarah let the paper drop. The soft thud echoed in the quiet corridor. Twins. She had a twin sister. Her entire life, she grew up as an only child in a prominent, wealthy family. Never, ever had there been any mention of a sibling, much less a twin. The initial revelation, instead of bringing clarity, plunged Sarah into an inner storm. If she had a twin sister, where was she? Why was she separated from her family? Her thoughts immediately flew to her mother, Eleanor. Eleanor Jenkins, the woman who raised her, loved her, gave her everything. How could she never have said a word about this? How could she have hidden the existence of a daughter? Anger began to boil within Sarah. A cold, intense rage directed at the woman she loved and respected above all else. Eleanor, the perfect mother, the pillar of her life. She had lied. She had hidden a monumental secret. and she seemed to have abandoned her own child. The idea of her mother, so loving towards her, having simply discarded one of her daughters, was repulsive. The contrast between their lives hit her hard. Sarah, raised in luxury, with the best opportunities, becoming a successful hospital director. And this woman, her sister, found collapsed on the street, wearing simple clothes, sick and without identification. The abyss between them was stark, a silent testament to cruelly different fates. And, in Sarah's mind at that moment, the blame lay with the woman who gave them life and who, seemingly, chose only one of them. She needed to confront her mother. She needed answers. The mystery of who the patient was had been solved, but the mystery of why and how this separation happened and her family's role in it was the next and most painful enigma to unravel. Sarah felt the weight of it all. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable. Her identity, her family, her history, everything she thought was true, was being dismantled piece by piece. And the DNA result was just the beginning. Anger and confusion dominated Sarah in the hours following the confirmation that the patient was her twin sister. She left the hospital, her mind turbulent, driving aimlessly through the streets of New York as she tried to process the magnitude of the discovery. Her mother, Eleanor, was on her way. How would she confront her? How would she ask about the sister Eleanor had, seemingly, abandoned? Sarah arrived at her apartment. The luxury and order that once comforted her now felt like a silent insult to the life her sister seemed to have led. She needed information, anything that could fill the terrifying gaps in her family history. She began searching through her family's archives, old documents, photo albums. She looked for any clue, any mention of a double pregnancy, a baby who didn't come home. But she found nothing. It was as if her sister had never existed to the Jenkins family. The secret was buried deep. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sarah's sister, who still didn't have a name for the staff or for Sarah, began showing slight signs of improvement. Dr. Mark Thompson and his medical team continued the treatment for the autoimmune disease, still shocked by the director's revelation. The news of the twins' existence spread through the hospital like an electric shock, adding a surreal layer to the situation. Eleanor Jenkins arrived in New York the next morning, landing with a heavy heart, worried about Sarah. She rushed to the hospital, anxious to see her daughter and understand what had happened. Sarah was waiting for her in the private wing's waiting area. The tension between mother and daughter was palpable. "Sarah! Darling! How are you?" Eleanor exclaimed, hugging her daughter tightly. "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah replied, her voice cold, pulling away from the embrace. Her blue eyes, usually full of affection when looking at her mother, now stared at her with a mixture of pain and accusation. "We need to talk. Now." Eleanor sensed her daughter's tone and realized something else was wrong beyond her health. They went to an empty office. Sarah didn't waste time. "Mom, I had a DNA test done. The patient in room 302, she's my sister. My twin sister." Sarah's words hit Eleanor like a blow. Eleanor's face paled, her eyes widened in disbelief and fear. "Sarah, what are you talking about? A sister? A twin? That's impossible." Her mother's reaction wasn't one of guilt or of being caught in a lie, but of genuine shock. Sarah's anger lessened slightly, replaced by even greater confusion. Eleanor seemed as shocked as she was. "It's not impossible, Mom," Sarah said, showing the DNA report. "Here, we are genetically identical. She has my face. How could you never tell me? How could you hide this? Why did you abandon her?" Tears began to stream down Eleanor's face. She took the report, her hands trembling. "Abandon? Sarah, I didn't know. I didn't know you had a sister, much less a twin." Sarah looked at her, incredulous. "You didn't know? Mom, she's my—" Our sister! How could you not know about the existence of a daughter? It was then that Eleanor revealed the most painful part of the secret. Sarah, there's something I never told you. Something your adoptive parents thought it best to keep from you until the right time. You're also adopted. Sarah's breath hitched. Adopted? Her? The only and beloved daughter of the Jenkins family? It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, that challenged her entire identity. Adopted? No, Mom, that's not true. I'm your daughter. You are my daughter in my heart, Sarah, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. But not by blood. Your birth parents, they couldn't take care of you. Of you two. You and your sister were left together at an orphanage in New York. Still babies. Your parents, the Jenkinses, adopted me. I was only a few months old. They wanted me to have a wonderful life, far from everything. They never told me about the existence of a sister, perhaps to protect me, to spare me pain, so I would feel completely part of the Jenkins family. I swore to them I would never tell you I was adopted until they felt the time was right. They passed away before that moment ever came. Sarah's world crumbled around her. Not only did she have an unknown twin sister, but her entire life was, in part, a lie built on secrets and omissions. She wasn't the biological daughter of Eleanor and Mr. Jenkins. She was an adopted child, separated from her sister at the orphanage, and taken to a life of privilege, while her twin, apparently, had a very different fate. The anger towards her biological mother gave way to a deep sadness and the understanding of life's cruel irony. Two identical babies from the same womb, placed in the same orphanage, and separated by families' choices that completely altered their destinies. One to a mansion on the Upper East Side, the other to where? A life of hardship that led her to collapse on the street. Eleanor, still crying, hugged Sarah. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm so sorry I never told you about the adoption. But I truly didn't know about your sister. The pain on Eleanor's face seemed genuine. Sarah, despite the whirlwind of emotions, felt a pang of compassion for her adoptive mother, trapped by a secret that wasn't hers. The focus shifted again. Now it wasn't just about who the patient in room 302 was. It was about who they were, about the biological mother who left them, about the orphanage that separated them, about the drastically different lives they led. The mystery deepened, revealing layers of secrets and painful truths. The search for answers had become a search for her own identity and her sister's history, and that search was just beginning. With Emily recovering and her memory gradually returning, the dynamic between the three women, Sarah, Emily, and Eleanor, began to take shape. Emily was, in many ways, Sarah's opposite. Cautious, distrustful of the world, and with a resilience forged by years of hardship. She still felt out of place in the hospital's luxurious environment and in the presence of Sarah, the successful director who shared her face, but not her story. Sarah, in turn, was learning to deal with the implicit guilt of having had everything while her sister had almost nothing. She dedicated her free time to Emily, talking, trying to fill the gaps of their separate lives. They discovered surprising common tastes, small mannerisms, and even identical scars that only twins could have. These small points of connection were like bridges built over the chasm that separated them. Eleanor, with her own shock and the pain of having kept such a huge secret, approached Emily with genuine affection. She saw in Emily the child who could have been her biological grandchild, the pain of the mother who left her daughters behind, and the suffering Emily had clearly faced. Her presence brought an element of family that Emily, starved of it her whole life, absorbed with a mixture of apprehension and gratitude. As Emily gained strength, their conversations deepened. Emily shared fragments of her childhood and adolescence, temporary foster homes, a constant feeling of not belonging, the struggle to find a job and a place in the world. Sarah listened, her heart aching, imagining how different her own life had been. The question of their biological mother loomed over them. Emily had very few memories of her, just flashes, a young face, a feeling of sadness and despair. Sarah felt the need to find her, to understand why they were left behind, to get answers. Eleanor, although apprehensive about the truths they might find, supported her daughter's search. The search for the biological mother was a delicate and emotionally draining process. With the help of contacts and investigators, they traced the orphanage records to the mother's name, Maria Silva. It was a common name, which made things difficult, but additional clues in the orphanage files, like her city of origin and some details from the day the babies were left, began to form a picture. They discovered that Maria Silva was a young immigrant woman, alone in New York, facing extreme poverty and no family support. The decision to leave her daughters at the orphanage seemed to be a desperate act by someone who felt she had no other choice, hoping the children would have a better life than she could offer. This revelation brought a new perspective for Sarah. The initial anger towards her biological mother gave way to a deep sadness and compassion for the young, vulnerable woman who was forced into such a heartbreaking choice. Tracing Maria Silva decades later was a challenge. Time and the vastness of New York were significant obstacles. But the determination of the sisters, now united by a common purpose, was relentless. They found a last known address associated with Maria, in a more modest neighborhood in Brooklyn. The tension was immense on the day Sarah and Emily went there. Accompanied by Eleanor, who insisted on going, a gesture that sealed the unspoken reconciliation with Sarah, they approached an old, modest building. Sarah's heart pounded. What if they found her? What if she didn't want to see them? What if the truths they discovered were even more painful? Emily was pale, the physical weakness still present, but her determination was evident in her eyes. They asked neighbors, described Maria Silva. They got confirmation that a woman with that name lived there, in an apartment on the third floor. The moment of knocking on the door felt monumental. It was the culmination of decades of separate lives, of secrets and mysteries. Sarah looked at Emily, who nodded with quiet courage. Sarah took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened slowly. A woman with graying hair and a face marked by life appeared. Her eyes, however, were unmistakable. The same deep blue eyes that Sarah and Emily shared. It was Maria. Her eyes shifted from Sarah to Emily and back to Sarah, and an expression of absolute shock and disbelief washed over her face. She brought a hand to her mouth, tears welling up instantly. "Sarah? Emily?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, it's not possible." The reunion was a whirlwind of emotions. Tears, hesitant hugs, questions, apologies, and Maria's painful story. The poverty, the hopelessness, the agony of having to leave her daughters to give them a chance. The life of regret and quiet longing she had lived. Maria never knew that Sarah was adopted by the wealthy Jenkinses. She just hoped her daughters had been found by families who could give them what she couldn't. The secret was finally revealed, but the wounds took time to heal. Sarah had to confront the complexity of the abandonment, the poverty that led to it, and the fact that her own privileged life was, in a way, a direct result of her birth mother's pain. Emily, for the first time, felt that her story had a beginning, an explanation for the feeling of being left behind. Eleanor's presence was crucial. Her acceptance and affection for Emily and Maria helped build bridges and create a new, unexpected, and complex family dynamic. It wasn't a traditional family, but it was a family, united by blood ties and the strength of overcoming adversity. The end of the story wasn't a simple, happily ever after, but the promise of healing, of building bonds, of facing the past together. Emily would continue her treatment, now with the unwavering support of Sarah and Eleanor. Sarah would learn to integrate the truth about her origin into her identity and use her position to help others who faced similar hardships. Maria, finally reunited with her daughters, would find some peace after years of regret. The story began with a face in the mirror and a buried secret, but it ended with the union of three women who, though they had drastically different paths, discovered that the strength of family and the search for truth could heal even the deepest wounds. The desire for resolution, which drove Sarah in the beginning, was satisfied, but the resolution came in a much more complex and meaningful way than she could ever have imagined, redefining what it meant to be family for her. This story reminds us how complex and fragile identity can be, and how the past, no matter how buried, always finds a way to shape our present and future. It shows us the devastating impact of circumstance, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unexpected ways family can be found and rebuilt. If this powerful journey resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might appreciate it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one.